And in this chapter, what Stokes does here is he tries to give us an idea of what a good skeptic looks like, right? And of course, from the history of philosophy perspective, probably the best skeptic that he can choose is David Hume.
Yeah.
Right? And Hume was a skeptic. He lived in the 1700s. And so he's going to be Stokes' example of what a good skeptic looks like.
And we see it too, people in the pro-atheist community, knocking on Humean's door, and
it's actually opening it, right?
And saying, "This is my guy. This is my guy." So we want to take them at their word and check out to see what they claim to believe. See if they actually believe it.
Yeah. So how do we be a good atheist? Well, we need to be skeptical. And what's our one prime example of skepticism is David Hume, right?
Yeah.
He calls him the great David Hume. Provides us with the best example of this science-induced skepticism. Right? His writings were generally sophisticated, iconoclastic, and Promethean, and he's been a champion of skeptical unbelievers ever since, as you've just alluded to. All right. So most specifically, he says we'll see that folks do follow Hume, as you suggested, our atheist friends, but they don't usually follow Hume in the skepticism about causality, induction, the material world, personal identity, and morality. And yet Hume questioned allowed us to question all of these types of things. Right. Yeah. All right, so then he talks about Alexander Rosenberg. He wrote The Atheist Guide to Reality, who attempts to follow Hume. He believes that Rosenberg, for the most part, is a sincere attempt to be this kind of skeptic that Hume, lays out for us.
He tries, yeah.
So he eventually found his way. Rosenberg, Stokes tells us, this is what he says: it took a few years, but by reading David Hume, that is Rosenberg, was able to figure out the mistake preventing science from satisfying me. The mistake, as Hume showed so powerfully, was to think there's any more to reality than the laws of nature that science discovers. But once Hume showed Rosenberg that science tells us all there is, the pieces of his atheistic worldview fell into place. So that's what Rosenberg claims, right? Hume showed him that all reality is just what nature tells us. In other words, only the natural world is what takes up reality.
Yeah, so naturalists, so they believe that anything physical is what's real, and anything that's not, see, taste, touch, sense perceived, is not real.
Right. So only our sense perceptions, what we can perceive, is in the nature is what's real.
Yeah.
Right?
So the mind, morality, numbers, different things that we kind of take for granted as existing or hope to exist or reason up to, or maybe not reason's the right word, but just being a product of the universe that we live in. Most things that we think exist or we take for granted as existing don't exist. So things like stars, bacteria, other people, but we can't say that the mind or other people's minds exist. They are fluctuations of chemicals that produce a personality. Right. And you can, maybe only be sure of your own.
Yeah. Or not. Right?
Or not.
Yeah.
As we'll get to.
Because only the natural world exists, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so he says most atheists think that Rosenberg gets things right when he says that science tells us there is no God. But he says, as he alluded to, few follow Rosenberg to the conclusion that atheism leads to anything goes morality. So the problem is Rosenberg questions morality, right? Because it's not a physical thing. Why? Here's a quote he gives us. Is there a God? This is from Rosenberg, right? Is there a God? No. What is the nature of reality? What physics says it is. What is the purpose of the universe? There is none. What is the nature of life? Ditto. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. Is there free will? Not a chance. What is the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There is no moral difference between them. Why should I be moral? Because it makes you feel better than being immoral. Is abortion, euthanasia, suicide, paying taxes, foreign aid, or anything else you don't like forbidden, permissible, or something obligatory? Anything goes, right? So he believes that most atheists follow Rosenberg with regard to the physical empirical world, but they don't want the anything goes morality.
Right. Well, and we've seen people like Dawkins try and make this claim too, but then in the same breath talk about loving his wife, and then trusting that she's faithful to him, and you can't really get that. And there's no basis for not going out and robbing the bank, punching your neighbor, taking his children as slaves. Not all that is permissible in Rosenberg's exercise of his
right,
worldview.
because if the physical universe is all there is, then an action is just an action is just an action.
Right.
One action is, there isn't no right or wrong, good or bad, because that's only what I feel or what I think.
Right.
But if a rock rolls down the hill, that's an action. If somebody, if I punch somebody, that's just an action.
Yeah.
It's what I feel is what Rosenberg says about it that kind of makes me think there's a moral stance.
Not to say that there aren't repercussions, that other entities exist and could throw you in jail, but the fact that you can say, no, this is wrong or this is immoral, even here to say there is no moral difference between them, or because it makes you feel better than being immoral. Even those kind of sneak in a little bit of, well, what do you mean by immoral if those words don't really exist?
Exactly.
I mean, if you're classifying two things, by what basis are you making a judgment call to say, well, this one seems more immoral than this one.
Right.
Well, this one seems like it would keep me out of jail, which then I could do more bad things. But then,
But again, we have to question what do we mean by bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything that keeps me in jail is bad.
Yeah. So, and we also though have to be careful about the consequences of the boulder rolling down the hill because it could squash me.
Sure. But we wouldn't point to the boulder and say that's evil.
Evil boulder.
Evil. Yeah. We would say, oh, that's tragic.
It's
but
just an action that happens in the physical world.
Right. So starvation, children dying. Nuclear holocaust.
Just actions that happen.
Those
in
are
the
things.
Physical.
Those
world.
are things.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yes.
So notice Rosenberg. Our friend Stokes there, Mitch Stokes, makes the point. Almost all of the atheists then believe that atheism is entirely consistent with objective moral laws, and he says, I think things are just the opposite. I do not think science shows there is no God, nor do I think that atheism is consistent with an objective ethical standard. Now, he's going to deal with ethics later in the second part of his book, but he's laying his cards out on the table, as it were, before here, right?